Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me again for Publicate 2020. I'm joined today by Joe Summers and Alex Ives, who are the co-founders of Terrace Records. Joe, Alex, hello.
Hey. Hello. Thanks for having us. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you both. So just to start with, could you just, for anyone who doesn't know, just tell us a bit about First Terrace, who you are, how you started, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I guess we probably both have our different ways of explaining the. It's very contentious, actually. Yeah, the stories. Two schools of thought. Yeah. No, it really actually started with Alex's record, if I remember rightly. Yeah. Alex wanted to self-release.
Technically started a bit before that. Technically. Well, the idea formulated.
Ah, okay.
Sorry.
No. Well,
two schools of thought.
Yeah.
Sorry. You go.
But, no. But you were there. So
basically, Joe and I used to work together, and at another label, a bigger label, and he was probably one of the few people I really loved sharing music with and getting music from, which might sound weird in a label, but I always just got a thrill sharing music with Joe, and I think our tastes always felt really right on. It felt like always a really lovely exchange when we would share some music together. And from my perspective, I never wanted to do a label, never wanted to run a label, never wanted to start a label. But as time kind of went on, got the idea of maybe it'd be cool to release one release, like a big compilation of all my favorite ambient musicians. So one night, Joe and I were meant to meet our partners at a film that they were showing at a university near where we live. And me and Joe got really lost and we couldn't find the cinema. And on that particular walk, I was kind of pitching the idea to Joe. I was like, oh man, I'm thinking of maybe like putting together a compilation record of just some of my favorite ambient stuff. And Joe was like, yeah, it's a cool idea, but basically shut it down and was like, yeah. He's like, it's cool, but maybe like just a one-off compilation with no context around it. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense on its own as just a one-off thing. And really my thoughts of doing a compilation were really because I was too fearful of committing to doing a proper record and starting a label. And then Joe had started a residency at a now defunct London radio station, which he let me join with him, and we started doing these radio shows. And the early idea was that we would put together sort of an annual compilation of our favorite artists that we played on the radio show that weren't like big artists, that were achievable to put together on a compilation. And that was sort of the early kind of sort of embryonic ideas of First Terrace. And then at that same time, I had a solo record I'd finished. I was like, well, I'll self-release that through the label. And that could be a good way of testing out. It would be awful to, can I swear?
Yeah.
Fuck up someone else's record. Like, if we're gonna basically agree to release someone's album, and we've never manufactured, we don't know how to do distribution, we don't know all this shit, let's fuck up my record. So that was sort of like the litmus test. I'd self-released my own record, and at the same time, me and Joe were doing this radio show, which has actually become a backbone of the label. We've been doing the radio show since before the label started, really.
It's been almost 4 years now, I'd say.
Yeah.
That's like for pretty much every month.
100%.
Yeah, every month, basically.
So that's sort of how, in my memory, the label sort of started.
I somehow I got mixed up with whether it was all sort of, I guess it was all kind of in the same
period of time.
Sorry, I'll stop. Like melting pot of kind of ideas between us.
Yeah.
And the record kind of emerged, and the compilation emerged from around the same kind of time.
Pretty much. We basically had a release show at a place called the Lewisham Art House.
Yeah.
And we released the comp, and I think available at that was the compilation and the record, I believe. if I remember, there's a photo of the merch table. They had both on there, and Afazia joined us, which is one of the artists on the label. And in some ways, and I know this wasn't the question, but whilst the vinyl record, I've got it here. This is the first record we released. Is this going to be on video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, look, this is the first record we released. I can't. We've closed the video of ourselves.
Sorry, we can see it.
Right, so this is the first record we released, and it works and everything. But if in some ways the compilation was probably the biggest indication of the direction of the label than anything.
I guess that because that was the first time
I've got that here as well.
Collaborated and kind of like took something from the beginning to the end together in a process, and that kind of, I guess, set the groundwork for all the, like, every release that we do now is also a collaboration. Like, it naturally, maybe one of us will take a kind of lead on a project. It will just kind of happen naturally that one of us sort of like maybe leads the direction of it, but ultimately everything is collaborative between us. That like is the output of the label.
100%.
And yeah, so what it is now is just kind of the same thing, but down the line with more releases and more kind of like established like practices and ways of doing things. But I think one of the big like foundational ideas around it was that we didn't want to really limit it too much. Like it's not just about releasing music in physical formats or anything like this. It's about like finding opportunities to create community and experience community through music, and that's led to like the radio shows has been a continuous thing. We've done several tours in Europe and in Japan early this year as well, and like one-off events as well. So that's kind of like bringing people together, you know, and yeah, in that sense.
And I know that can be something that that sounds like a throwaway comment, but I think what Joe says is something that from the very, very beginning we made a really conscious effort to be very, because we've both been at other labels and I think we've both been in and around various music projects down the years, and they all work or haven't worked for their own reasons. When we got to a point where we started collaborating on the label, I think very, very early on we figured it has to be about the people we work with and each other, because I think most people who would agree that you don't start a label releasing sort of experimental ambient music for money. So and that's fine. That's fine. I kind of have a saying like, worst case scenario, we end up with 300 records that we really wanted anyway if no one buys it. Right. But you know, the people that you work with, there's so many amazing people doing wonderful music and wonderful things out there that you don't need to work with people that you don't have a good energy with, and that includes Joe and myself. Like, whilst we were really good friends prior, this is a completely different relationship, and it had to be one built out of mutual respect. And the way that got built was had to be the foundation that ran through every release. If people believed that we had a very balanced and mutual respect for one another, I think it's easier to buy into that energy as a label. And it definitely, you know, with these tapes, like, you know, Joe will sit there and we'll cut out all bits and we'll sit in his floor in his flat in New Cross when he lived there, or at my place folding up things, and just doing those things together is a nice way of like building an understanding of what you're putting out. And then through that we have when I say rules, we obviously have an ethos that runs through the label. One thing at the very beginning we always said, if we both wouldn't buy the record, let's not do it. like if a project comes in, but we are our own target audience. If one of us wouldn't buy it, and that has been the case where Joe's been into a record, I've been into a record, and the other one didn't quite feel it. We go, if we both wouldn't go out and buy this, if someone else did it, it's not the right project. And I think,
yeah, because then you can't, as you said, like we're not doing this to get rich, and if we were, we'd be sorely disappointed. And so, like, you know, what's the point in spending all your energy on a project that you're half-hearted about? That's the, you know, that, and there's even like pieces of music that we get sent that's like, wow, this is really, really good, but I don't feel like I need to do it. Like we need to do it, you know, that, like, and that's sort of become something that I go to, like that feeling of like, do I have like a burning desire to do this thing or not? Yeah. And because, yeah, I think when you don't, and then you go through a project and you start to, and it's hard to kind of keep yourself really motivated about it, and ultimately to like deliver something that you really can like get behind.
Yeah, and if something's coming in that you don't have that burning need for, I guess you can't do justice to the work that's coming in. Like,
yeah, it shouldn't be us that does it, because someone else will have that burning desire to do that, and like that's great, you know.
I think as well, like being on the other end of it, like being an artist beforehand, or still one, but not from, even though I worked at a label, it was, you know, in a role, feeling that, you know, when you approach a label as an artist, you're asking them to put out your music, you know, and you feel like you're in a position where you're asking, but actually from starting a label and being on the other side of it, where you're directly communicating with the artist, you're really asking for the artist's trust. And for the artists that we tend to work with, and most artists, I imagine, many artists, it's an emotionally huge thing to put together a body of work, and time and energy, and so much has gone into it. To ask them to trust you to put it out, it would be an incredible disservice to any of them if we didn't believe it. Because there's an intangible, you can tick all the boxes, you can make sure it's manufactured right, and everything's spelled correct, and the PR goes out on time, and blah blah blah, and all that shit. And you can do all that stuff if you don't love it. You can, it's doable, but it's that extra like little bit that you can squeeze out of something,
and it seeps into the whole project. And
I can only tap into that if I love it. If I'm so stoked on a record that, and you the same, to sit up and like fold those extra like 100 booklets, and you do it because you're stoked about doing it.
Yeah.
And you know it's going to mean something to the artist. And you end up feeling incredibly grateful to have been invited into their project. That genuinely is how it ends up feeling.
Yeah. Do you think, because how many is it now? You've got 14 releases, something like that, 14, 15?
Sounds like you.
I think it's 14.
Yeah, I know that.
I just checked my notes. I'm pretty sure it's 14.
Yeah, 14, and probably like, I guess it's two more, one more on the close horizon, and two more on
a couple more circulations around the sun.
Yeah, a few on a kind of long, on slow boil.
Yeah.
In having done that many now, like, have you been able to identify, like, between yourselves, what the guiding principles are for what draws you to a project?
One between us both, or
just generally speaking, like individually or together.
It's really hard because as you've heard, the music is very varied. You know, there's not one thread that really ties everything together. And actually, it was funny. One of the artists that we've released, Safizo, when I met him in Japan and we played a show with him. It was after the show, and he asked actually, like, why did you want to, like, why are you releasing my music? Like, because he checked out the other stuff and he was like, it's not really like anything like this. And part of that is like, well, that's kind of the point. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that there isn't really anything else like that. And the only thing that links those projects, his project and one of like the more ambient projects, is the feeling I can only speak personally, but like the feeling it gives me, and in like an excitement when I listen to the music, and different things will put me into different moods. But if it's totally absorbing, and if it's totally transportative, you can go to different places. But that's generally, like, I feel that's what it has to be.
I think like someone put it quite well a while ago. I was watching an interview. Someone was talking about, you know, will playlists usurp the radio? And, you know, one of those like articles. But one of the few interesting points to come out of that article was, you know, and I don't have a, you know, strong opinion either way on that. But one thing that came out of that really interesting is like a radio DJ can play some Napalm Death next to a new Kendrick song, you know, and they can make that make sense through context, you know. I don't know what radio show that would be, but they can make that make sense through the context of them guiding the listener on their show on a journey. With a playlist, slightly less so. And I think with a label, that is true also. You know, what we hope to do is create a, you know, a space with which it can all make sense within. And the really overriding to the exterior, at least, I hope, and you always hope this, I'm sure everyone would hope this, that the thing that is that prevalent is that it's just quality, it's just good music, it's just good tunes, it's good art, it's tasteful, it's pleasurable, and not everything's going to be for everyone, but it makes sense because we made it make sense. That's our job in this, to make Safizo feel like this can be his home, and it can be a place where his art gets to a space and respect it deserves, and we can be dynamic enough to be able to present a choir record and a techno record in the same label, and you know, because it's also reflective of our personal tastes. Yeah, you know, we listen to so much stuff, and I know that sounds again like a throwaway comment, but if we're always asking ourselves, would I buy that record? Yeah, this is a record I'd buy, so I'd love to put it out.
I think something that nice that happens as a result of that is that, because, you know, from an outside perspective, because you've got, let's say, Safizo next to Beacon Sound Choir or something, because you've put out both of them, it forces the listener to try and find out what the similarities are there, and look for similarities that might not necessarily be there if you encountered them separately. Yeah. And so you kind of explore new dimensions of the music.
Yeah, I like this idea of the space, you know, the space that the label is, and you know, being a space that can, by definition, hold everything. You know, like we to create a space where no genre of music, if it was the right piece of music, would feel out of place, you know. I still, there are records obviously that we hear and we think like, okay, that's not like fitting with what we are interested in. But I would say, like, within those genres, there's there has to be,
there'll be someone doing something.
There'll be someone doing something that is going to be, that's just going to find this little pocket that
100%.
that can sit alongside. And yeah, I think that's an attitude to try and keep. Just nothing is ruled out on the basis of sort of this the scene that it's coming from.
100%. And I think the thing that's been really interesting, and I think it's obviously, you look back at Joe and I's friendship, and it begins from sharing music together. And I think going through to a point where very, very rarely, and I can't even remember a time where we've really had a different opinion on a piece of music. Like, there might be one where I really dig it, but I'm not sure it should be a record. Yeah. But I understand why you brought it in. And I think because we speak so often about things, and we're very open about, you know, our opinions, which is important, we do kind of, I tend to feel like we very, very often just land at the same point on a record. Mm-hmm. And it might be like, there's definitely been records where like I haven't got it first time, and Joe's like, he'll circle back on that. He'll go back in my inbox, and vice versa. Yeah, and it's not a testament to the fact that I didn't like it, but you know, I know if Joe's going to like hammer home a point on a record, it's really worth listening to. And I'm probably just not giving it the time. I might have just put it on and like, oh, I'm not sure about that. And if he's sent, you know, I do think that kind of thing, that I just think that's probably been there from before the label. Just be like, oh, that's someone I could do a radio show with, or that's someone I could chat to music about. We just sort of, we like the same intangibles about a record that perhaps, I don't know, it just feels right, but don't feel right. I know that sounds incredibly reductive, but it is quite hard to put a point on it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's an intangible. It's taste essentially, which is, I think, intangible.
But you can kind of trust someone's taste, and if you trust someone's taste, you're more willing to give something a go.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why, like, I mean, yeah, everything you said to me, I'm like excited about listening to, you know.
Yeah, likewise.
So, yeah.
And I think what's interesting about that is, like, in terms of my relationship with labels and with publishers, if you form that, you can form that sense of trust with the publisher themselves. And so there'll have been records you've put out which I've listened to and thought, this isn't for me, but I'm going to give it that extra go because, you know, I've listened to Justin Wright and it's incredible. And so I want to, that's kind of the gift of interacting with small labels, I think.
100%. I mean, growing up, I've always loved labels. You know, and I'm not just saying it, I used to like when I was growing up, and I'd flip over CDs and I'd be like, oh, right, Geffen, who else have they put out? Or Sub Pop, what else have they put out? And I'm absolutely romantic about labels, and why I've been working at labels for a long time now, because I've indie labels specifically that, and I don't know if every indie label does, maybe they do to a degree, but ones that really encapsulate a kind of community or a sense of artistic community, for me, is massively, massively alluring. And I do think you have to work at that. There's a label I'm going to call out, or shout out rather, in a positive, not call out, shout out in a positive way. A label who I've been lucky enough to kind of become friends with, called Blank Editions. And David puts a lot of work in. You know, when I started talking to him about some music stuff and we became friends, he's like, you know, I want to be able to have everyone on the label that they can come around for tea. We could have a drink together, we could have dinner together, we could hang out. And, you know, he's older than us, but he is, I don't know, he's like an infant in terms of his excitability about music. And I have to absolutely implore his enthusiasm. And I think he keeps that enthusiasm because he's created a community of artists that are friends of each other, that have overlapped with First Terrace. So people like Ben Vince has done records with Blank Editions. The artists on First Terrace have done records on Blank Editions. And that's by pure chance. But what you do with this sort of very, for me, family vibe and community sort of driven approach, you can't buy that. it's there or it isn't there, and that doesn't have to be a geographical family thing. I think for Joe and I, we've hardly. Am I right in saying that only Ben and Jacob's are the only London-based artists we've actually released?
Yeah, album-wise. Yeah.
Album-wise, so most of our releases have been international, but I do feel that you can still achieve that sense of community across the label, doing things like the tours together and the comms that can create that. And with that, as a outside person coming in, maybe like a fan or someone new engaging with the label, you would hope that you can get that sense of, oh, okay, oh, that person's done a comp and they've been on that split and there's that, oh, they're friends with that label and they do these tours, and and you can start to feel a thread through it, and you feel like you can become a part of that community, and it extends outwards. A thing that Joe and I said it very early on, like we do a thing called we do a physical mailing list. So, you know, if you buy a record from us, on our newsletters and on other things, we'll be like, oh, send us your address, your postal address, and we'll write infrequently.
Yeah, Joe got it last time.
Oh, did you get one?
Yeah.
Right on. But we kind of encourage people to write back, or the idea being that
I think it's
oh, okay.
So it's like,
God, I'm so bored.
This lovely.
That thing, yeah, right on. And the idea being that you can kind of create a bit of a communication and an openness with a label that's like, yeah, come and chat to us. Like if you've got some, there's a nice example, like we have a church down the road from us in South London, or from me in South London, where we've done some events at, and we've done some recording there. We're going to be doing some more recording there. And there's a guy there, Ashley, who looks after the organ in the church, which is very, very, St. Giles. He's very kindly let us use the organ. Anyway, the point is that he sent me music, not to plug for the ladies, like, oh, I've been going and I'm doing this organ album and I'm doing this choir record, and it's very different than stuff we were doing First Terrace. It's just stuff he does, but it's nice to feel like, man, send some tunes over. Like, at the end of the day, it's love. Not every interaction has to be a commercial one. It is nice to just,
to share.
Very much feel
to collaborate.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you feel like? do you also feel like there's a community among labels as well? Like you talk about like Blank Editions having this kind of relationship with, but does that extend to the label culture?
I think it's more like there's a community between the people that run labels. Yeah. Like the people are the people. In terms of like the labels that we I would say are like kind of within like our specific community. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know, we connect it to those people maybe through the fact that they run labels, but actually like we're really connecting to them because of who they are as a person and who we are as a person, and it's just happenstance, you know, that they also run a label. So I think it's more about people and less about, I think, to say that it would be about labels as a, you know, as a ultimately like potentially a name for just like a commercial entity, you know, and then it's more about commercial speculation in a way, whereas like, I don't know, and maybe there are some probably there are some communities that are more based on around that, but that's not really the kind of community that I'm as interested in.
I think our friend Zoe McPherson, another shout out, a really wonderful musician. You should listen to her stuff. She's a friend of the label. She feels like family to us, and she put it really well. We put on a show a little while ago in London at a nice venue called Cafe Otto, and she was around, and I think she came, it was the show she came and hung out at, and some of our friends were there as well, and we were sitting in the car driving up there, and we were saying, you know, some things get lost so quickly when people are looking for the next sort of commercial opportunity, you know, rightly or wrongly, different ambitions. But what I found through my experience in other projects and this project and whatever is when you really spend a lot of time building the human relationships, the rest will kind of fall into place. So, and she said, you know, you get to a point where you're playing a show in a town, and it just so happens your friend has a really nice venue. And then it just so happens that maybe a friend of yours runs a label that wants to put out your music. And then it just so happens that you've got a mate who has a distribution company. And it doesn't all have to, I know it doesn't all work like that for everyone, but I've found that you tend to end up working with your friends, and they are professionals or they're very good at what they do. But it just means that all your interactions are very much built out of, even your quote unquote more commercial interactions are built around just like absolutely vibing what each other's doing. And with that, just as a sort of an addition to what Joe's saying, that's how you develop that thing. So our friends who runs labels, we're friends because we really fuck with the same music and we go to the same shows, and we really like, I'm following his label because I really rate the music he's putting out. Yeah. And maybe you could collaborate. Like there's been talk in the past, it never came to fruition, of a friend of our label. We would collaborate on a release and pool our resources. But that was, you know, if they were a sick label, but the guy who ran it was like a dickhead, we wouldn't have done it. So it is still all out of like, or not, it's a good pleasant chap. But he wasn't, he was a but the point is, we would do it because of the people. And I know that's exactly what Joe was saying, but just to kind of bring it around to other conversations I've had with artists. And what I'm seeing as well, in addition to that, is more artists starting to start up their own labels and set up their own thing, which for me, I think is fucking great. I think it's incredibly empowering to an artist to understand that you can control your own output, that you don't have to rely on other people, and as a consequence, when you bring people into your team, you know why, and you can really be the master of your own kind of direction. I think that's so empowering. I'm so excited whenever a friend does that.
Yeah, and also that you're completely in control, or as in control as you can be, about how people then like engage and consume your music.
100%.
Because, you know, for us, we always want it to be a collaboration with an artist, and like we'll come to the table with ideas, and obviously they will, like, of course, come to the table with ideas as well. And then generally it's a super nice process of just being really excited about which ideas are working, and we agree and kind of build from there. But it can be the case where you go to a label and then they really want to take your music but not take anything else, you know, or go in a completely different direction. And I mean, if you're happy to take your hands off the wheel, that's your choice. But there are also so many small decisions that really affect how people engage with the music and how people perceive it, in terms of the way it comes to you. It's just the way it arrives on your doorstep. It totally changes the way you hear the music. I really think. Yeah,
I agree.
So another question I had, which I don't want to phrase it cynically, but like, do you feel, how much ownership do you feel of the final records?
It's a good question. It's a tough
ownership.
One.
Yeah, that's a bit of a cynical word, maybe.
For the ones that haven't sold that are in my room.
I jest.
No, sorry, you go.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because it's like, to a certain extent, you know, we're both artists as well. Like, speaking from my point of view, like I know that I get more engaged in a project when I'm more involved, and like I'm, you know, and the label is a creative project for in my mind, for me.
Yeah.
It's not just like an administrative platform to enable other people to release their music.
Yeah.
And in that sense, there is always a small portion of ownership, but I wouldn't say ownership feels very strong.
Yeah.
Because of course, like the project is someone else's. It's more like a feeling of satisfaction when
like a parent, you don't own your kid.
Yeah,
you can have pride in that doing well.
Yeah, exactly, and
take the kudos when it goes well.
Exactly. And use a pseudonym, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, it's like a satisfaction with knowing that maybe something like a conversation that you had together, a way of collaborating, like opened up the project and kind of like helped it blossom a little bit. And it's just like that feeling of it's involvement rather than ownership. We're like, obviously financially we become financially invested in a project, and we have certain rights, as a legal entity, which is the kind of like commercial side, which just makes it like viable to do it.
Sure.
But in terms of psychologically, I think that's my answer.
I think like from my angle, like the ownership question is a super interesting one, and without wanting to kind of sidestep it, our friend of the label, who's been on this compilation, a lady called Sukatoa, and Naomi, she does a lot of work with sampled sounds, and she reuses those sounds to create her music. And someone, I can't remember, she asked the question, someone asked her the question, like, oh, well, as soon as they're sampled sounds, she'd go out and record field recordings or whatnot. Even though you remade them into a song, how much ownership do you feel like you have of them? And she's like, I don't want to misquote her. It was a while ago we had this chat, but it was a really nice example of thinking about how you're just using the things around you to kind of present it, and you're almost kind of the funnel. And the ownership part is like the art is made, we then help produce a kind of physical representation that people can buy. The art is the kind of thing that is absolutely from the artist, and we can help package it and put it out, and that doesn't diminish that, and that doesn't mean it can't be done in an artful way. But the bit that we can own is individual, without wanting to sound too airy-fairy. You can own the experience of being a part of the process of the record coming out. That's mine. Joe has his own that he owns. The artist has their own. And if we can kind of create an environment where everyone's stoked on the process from the start to the end, they feel completely supported in their vision as best we can do, then we can own those experiences, and maybe we can share some. That's the bit that I think you can own for me. And the physical part of it, like I said this to Pauline, who did the Bora album. We did her record, and we did a really cool. She put on an amazing show in Berlin that we helped put together with her. And at the end, we had a big hug, and it was really emotional, kind of putting that record out. It's been a long time coming for various reasons. And I said to her, the art was done a while ago, and it's amazing, and you did that. The record, we're happy to have been able to put it out, and that will sell. It will do what it does, whatever. And you'll have that in your home, and it'll be in some people's homes. But these moments that we get to share, and we have a hug, and we watch a show, and we experience, that's priceless. And that's something we can all take away from it.
Your own,
and music's amazing. Music's been is a wonderful vehicle to create those moments. And I know that sort of maybe that doesn't answer the question quite how you wanted it, but
no, it's good.
You wanted to say.
I want a shrewd answer. I want you to say it's mine.
Yeah.
So we've not got a huge amount of time left, but there is something. Last thing I want to ask is, Alex, or both of you, if you could talk about cafe songs. about what the process of making the record has been, and where you are with, because is it been released now?
It just came out on Friday, just gone. So what day is it? Wednesday? Like a few days, 4-5 days ago. Yeah. So Cafe Songs is a collection of songs I wrote during lockdown, and initially I basically kind of took a big step back from being in any way creative during lockdown. There's so much pressure on producing stuff and writing, and people are always so caught up on being productive. I think actually it's really valuable to have a bit of time off. So that was my ambition. And in doing that, I wrote a record. And it was a very different record. I've never written a record like this sonically. But the most important part, I think, from my angle, the backdrop of which it came across, or the backdrop under which I wrote it, was during some of the biggest sort of civil rights marches, Black Lives Matter movements in the UK, US, and around the world, and being a person of color, feeling incredibly emotionally like hit with that, with my partner and my family and my friends, and a big part of that, and seeing all the ways in which people are trying to figure out the narrative with which they want to hope in many ways try and support and figure out what they've done right and wrong. I really wanted to try and see. It was impossible to detach the writing of that record from the time in which it was written. The songs weren't written about it per se, but they were written under the time when this is all happening. And as a consequence, at the label, we've been having a lot of discussions about how we can better support the Black community, Black artists, things we can do better, supporting different various charities. So we wanted to put this record out as an opportunity to raise some money, really, through the sales of it, for some charities that we as a label feel quite strongly about the work that they're doing. And there's so many charities, it's hard to pin down which ones you want to associate with, but Joe and I, whilst we co-run the label, a huge part of the label is Lucy, who does all our socials. She's a big part of helping the label do what it does. And Jodie, she's just come on board to do our publishing. We all sat down together and said, what charities do we each feel most strongly about right now, if we could each pick one to donate to? So that kind of formed part of the decision and putting Cafe Songs out. And yeah, it was one of the things that we've been talking about as a label that we wanted to try and do, is little things that we can do to support. And it's a small drop in the ocean compared to some of the amazing people that are doing work out there. There's a group called Space Africa, who everyone should check out. They've done an incredible release, which is raising money for some amazing charities, and they're an incredible artist. And there are many, many more. It's just a small opportunity to try and raise some money and awareness. Sometimes, just even if the money side of it is relatively small to some of the donations people are able to make, if it can be a vehicle to push forward the work that these charities are doing, it feels like a nice opportunity vehicle to do that. So that was sort of the intention behind Cafe Songs. I sort of wanted to not be too, in a weird way, like, yes, I put it out and I wrote it, but very much, inside the thing, it's got information about all the charities, and very much an opportunity to shine a light on these people who are just doing imperative work all year round when the spotlight isn't on them. They're just doing that work. So that's sort of what the vehicle for Cafe Songs was. Yeah, really.
Awesome. That's cool. And so anyone watching, there's a link on our link tree in the Publicate bio for First Terrace's website. And can they find the links to those charities on there as well?
Yeah. So if you go on the First Terrace site, you go on our Bandcamp and you click on Cafe Songs, there's a bit of information about the release and links through to all the charities.
Wicked.
Maybe we should mention the charities.
Yeah, sure.
Attention Action, Southall Black Sisters, UK Black Pride, and the Black Curriculum.
Yeah. Cool. Guys, thanks so much for doing this. This has been really, really interesting. and really nice to chat to you both.
Yeah, thanks. Nice questions.
Yeah, lovely questions. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah, real pleasure. And yeah, looking forward to watching all the other interviews.
Cool. Amazing. Well, I'll say goodbye. See you later, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.